Okay, now that everything has officially recorded, I want to say thank you all for joining us today. We do have one participant, hopefully more people come along, but welcome to our Career Identity Intersections series hosted by the Student Diversity and Social Justice Office as well as UNLV Career Services. We have some panelists today to share their experiences. We have some prompted questions, but before we begin, I want to talk about some virtual communal agreements to get us going. So first thing is go ahead and mute your microphone in terms of our participants. We don't want any feedback or any stuff from your end. So just go ahead and mute those microphones now. If you want to turn your captions on, you can scroll down at the bottom of the screen, click the closed captioning button. That will allow you to pick up any of the voices from those that are speaking, and you can see it in a closed caption format. You as participants may keep your video on and off, but our presenters will be using both audio and video. Some will be audio only, and that's quite all right. Please ask your questions via the chat so everyone can see them. There is a Q&A portion at the end of our presentation today. And lastly, we will be recording this presentation and sharing it on our website. So we'll put it on our Career Services YouTube channel, and you will be able to view this, and your friends and family will view this later as well. So I'm going to be your moderator today, so let's go ahead and skip that slide. My name is Cassie Moore. I will be a fly on the wall today, and I'll just interject every once in a while to make sure that we're on track. But I work in the UNLV Career Services Office, and without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Beginning with Mike, go ahead and answer the questions. Where do you work? What is your role? Mike is not here. Let's start with Stephen. And what does your day-to-day look like? Stephen, go ahead and kick us off today.
Sure. I'm Steve Flack. I work at Clark County School District. I'm actually the director of recruiting for the entire school district. So I'm responsible for talent attraction, talent marketing, and talent engagement for just about every role that we recruit for in the school district. It's like a small city, right, in that we have all sorts of different resources that your normal community would have, but it's internal to the school district. Day-to-day work, I've got a team of recruiters out there that's actively engaged in the open opportunities that we have in engaging passive talent and active talent, and trying to bring them into the school district and meet the educational needs and the staffing needs for the school district here in Las Vegas. Jeff, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Dietrich, and I work at the Education Opportunity Center here at UNLV, and it falls under one of the trio programs that come out of the U.S. Department of Education. So I actually work at the center, if anybody's familiar with the center here at UNLV. What I particularly do is this program, we assist adults returning to school or looking to go to school for the first time. And all of our clients have to be at least first generation and or low income individuals. So my role as an academic coordinator is I just do outreach into the community to pull in participants to our program. My specific areas that I work in are veterans and incarcerated. So I spend a lot of time out in the community at veteran events, but then I also spend quite a few events at Clark County Detention Center, Southern High Desert in the past, and a few of the halfway houses. So when individuals are coming out of incarceration, part of their requirements at times could be pursuing education. So that's what we do. My day-to-day looks like sitting with clients, helping them out with their educational needs and its basic needs, financial aid, application process, helping them find a program that fits their particular education goals. So that's what I do in a nutshell, and I shall pass it off to Miss Roche.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, my name is Linda Roche. I work with AAA Insurance, or known as CSA Insurance Group. I work in the physical damage department. However, we are transitioning to including all the adjusters to also take over that role. So basically on a day-to-day basis, what I do is anytime there is an accident, we get these cases and we do any liability investigation to determine who was at fault for the accident and handle the damages to the vehicles that were involved. I'm also the president for the Military Appreciation Group within the company. That is an employee resource group that tries to represent our military employees. And we also reach out to the community here in Las Vegas by doing a lot of community service. And Celia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Celia Croft, and I am with BMC. We are in the construction industry. My role with the organization is I lead all of the military programs and hiring for the organization for all of our locations throughout the continental U.S., which covers 18 states and about 150 locations. As far as what my day-to-day looks like, I do a lot of outreach to various military installations, a lot of the SVA chapters throughout the country at various universities. And I also do a lot when it comes to the implementation of our internal recruiting and retention programs of our military transitioning service members as well as veterans.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your introductions, and I'll actually take this opportunity to introduce Ross Bryant, who will actually take over the moderating for today. So Ross, I'm going to go ahead and transition to the next slide, in which you are welcome to, of course, introduce yourself and then prompt our panelists for the next set of questions. You ready to go? You're muted, so just press the unmute button.
Sorry about that. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Ross Bryant. I'm retired Army. For the last 8 years, we've been building and tweaking and running a veterans center that's nationally recognized at UNLV. We serve over 1,800 vets, active duty, reservists, National Guard, and about 350 of those are military family members. Over the years, we've hosted Student Veterans of America. We've also hosted different research projects. I see some of the people on the call, like Frankie Perez and others, who have been part of those things. And obviously, Jeff was a former Rebel vet president. We've also hosted career fairs for veterans before the COVID-19, where we would host 100 employers working with Senator Reid and Senator Cortez Masto and others to bring in employers from around the country, not just locally here in Nevada, to help veterans transition to getting their next job and their next transition. So with that, I'd like to then talk about how we're going to use the panel to discuss a couple different things. We'd like to ask the panelists to talk about their own experiences as far as their own transition. So like your military background and then how you got to the job you've gotten now. So I guess I don't have the slides as far as the standing, but I'll start with Stephen. I'll start with you, I guess.
Yeah, sounds great. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ross. And we've met before, Ross and Jeff, right? I was at MGM Resorts before I came over here.
Oh yeah,
and I didn't have a beard.
Familiar. Okay.
So military background, I am a retired Marine, 27 years in the Marines, Master Gunnery Sergeant, E9, for those of you who don't know the Marine vernacular there. I spent 20 years of my career in the Marines on recruiting duty. So I tell people I'm not that type of Marine. And it really set me up for success to where I'm at right now, or at least on my way to success and, certainly doing something that I enjoy doing. While I was in the Marines, I transitioned. I was the operations chief for all of recruiting for the Marine Corps. So I had about 4,000 recruiters that I oversaw, and went to MGM Resorts and oversaw 4. So I took a little bit of a step back to be able to take a step forward. Spent about 3 years at MGM Resorts, which was a great experience for me. Gained some credibility there, great community contacts like yourselves. And then I'm over at Clark County School District now, overseeing their entire recruiting process, which is certainly something a little bit more challenging and a lot more rewarding there. And when I was at MGM, I oversaw veterans recruitment, things of that nature, and that's where we met. So yeah, always eager to help out veterans and help them transition. And I work with quite a few different veterans mentoring groups, things of that nature. My career path has been great so far. Got to stay humble, right? Again, as you transition, it was made it a lot easier for me to understand that I had to take a step back to take a step forward. So my career path is exactly where I'd like it to be right now. I mean, we'd all like to be the president of a company, but I know that's not realistic as we transition. But 4 years out of service now, and I'm happy with where I'm at, absolutely. So, Jeff.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I thought you looked familiar, man. I couldn't put your face to where I met you, but now it makes sense. So good stuff. So my military background is I did 12 years in the Army as a medic. I was just a sergeant. And after I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was just, it was time for me to go. So I transitioned out. And at the time I was in Savannah, Georgia, because my wife had been medically retired. And so I started going to a small state school there. When I got out, I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I had a GI Bill and I was going to go to school. And even going to school, I'm like, well, I was a medic, so I'll just do like be a doc or something, be a PA. But I was unhappy that year after I got out, and that first year it was a challenge. It was a challenge. So we decided to come back to Vegas. I was living in Vegas before I joined the Army. My father retired out of here. He did 23 years in the Army. So that's how we wound up back in Vegas. So I started going to UNLV, and then I was doing pre-med, and I'm like, well, I don't want to do medicine anymore. I was just miserable. So I dropped that, tried nursing. I'm like, no, I just really figured out that I didn't want to do medicine anymore. As much as I enjoyed it when I was in the Army, that's something I didn't want to carry into my civilian career. So I dropped that and got my bachelor's, and now I'm going into my final semester on my master's. As far as how my military background played into all this, and it was the discipline I learned, and the structure, and some of the self-confidence, right? Because, some of us, when we go in, our self-confidence isn't exactly there. Then you get into the military and they break you down, build you back up. And you're like, oh, this is not as bad as I thought it was. And in that time, I had a bunch of different experiences at UNLV that helped kind of with my career. And so where I'm at right now is as much as I enjoy what I do, I don't know if that's something I'm going to do forever, right? Because I just don't want to be an academic coordinator. I want to be a director. I want to be a leader in some type of department. So I'm kind of in flux right now with where my career is going to be going here soon. I don't know if I want to stay in higher ed. I've thought about the private sector. I don't have any experience in a private sector. Everything's been kind of public sector, if you're including the military on this. But as far as just the discipline and having the drive to complete my education, I have no without a doubt that the military greatly helped out with that, because before I went into the military, I was going to go to school and I was just a knucklehead. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do this. And I dropped out before I joined. So obviously when I got out, my priorities got realigned with the military experience. But I'm optimistic about my future. I have no doubt that there will be opportunities that presented itself, because it's been my experiences since I've been out of the military and back working and going to school that opportunities that presented themselves multiple times. So I have no doubt that there'll be something that will present itself in the future. As for where I am right now, I love working at UNLV. Maybe that will transition into another position on campus somewhere else. So I'm optimistic about everything, and I'm looking forward to how it's going to turn out. So that's the excitement I have with mine. So we'll go to Ms. Rocha.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, so I am also prior Army. I did 8 years. When I was in the military, I was in the aviation field. My father is an F-18 pilot, so naturally I went that way, because prior to the military, my mom had either you go to medical school or law school, which it really wasn't my cup of tea. So I got really excited about learning about the aviation field. So I joined the Army, and I joined flight operations and learned how to set up airports and all kinds of things you can do within the aviation field in the military. Luckily, the career that I picked when I got out of the military, it was something that I was able to pursue as a civilian. By the time I got out, I had my FAA license and was able to do that as a civilian. Did that for about 10 years. At the 10-year mark, we had our son. So my husband was also active duty. He's actually a combat engineer. And it was a decision of somebody needed to kind of take a little step back, since we had a child now, with him being gone all the time. And being in the aviation field, what I was doing, I was traveling a lot. So it was kind of hard to have our son and continue with these careers. I took a step back. I said I was going to try to be a stay-at-home mom, but that only lasted for about a week. Then I found AAA and I said, why not? Let me apply. I have no insurance background. I don't know anything. My whole life has been aviation. That's what I know. So I took a chance, did the interview. I was surprised actually that they called me for the interview and they took a chance on me. And in these past 4 years have been amazing. I am now transitioning to the fraud department within the company. So it's been great. I think what's helped me from my military background is the ability to change directions within the company and learning new things. I think that's been very helpful towards my career path. And Celia?
Perfect. Thank you. So I actually have not personally served in the military. So I am not a veteran, but I come from a long line of service members. Pretty much everyone in my family, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, my father, my stepfather, both brothers have all served in some capacity in various branches. And that's really what's led me to the position that I'm in now. So I've always been in the HR field. I've always been in some type of recruiting or diversity and inclusion type role. But about 6 years ago, the company that I was with, we didn't have any type of diversity and inclusion. We didn't have any specialized programs. We didn't have anything in place to really support our veterans. And at the time I was living in Michigan, and Michigan has one of the highest populations per capita of veterans. And a lot of our workforce were veterans. And I wanted to do something to help retain them into our organization. And that's really what's led me on the path that I am on in the role that I'm in. So the last 6 years or so, that's really where my focus and my dedication and passion has been building the programs and building the recruitment strategy and building those internal efforts to make sure that we are assisting individuals either that are transitioning out of the service currently or that have been out for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We really want to make sure that the assimilation into the organization, no matter where they're at in their process of being a veteran and what their history looks like, we want to make sure that we're able to give them a long-lasting career. So that's really what's led me to where I'm at now.
So I think that's everybody from the panel. I don't think we've missed anyone, have we? Okay. I'd like to add something too with everyone's discussion there, that there's a lot of discussion now with stuff that's recently gone on with Mr. Floyd and all of that situation and everything. And I really believe that as these challenges that America needs to face to being more inclusive, combating racism and all those things, I know everybody in the military had a different kind of career. I mean, there's no cookie cutter career for anyone. But I would also tell you that, my military experience has been that we all learned a lot of great leadership. We all grew up in a military that is as diverse, if not more diverse, than the country that we serve. And it doesn't mean it was perfect. It doesn't mean it was always inclusive. It's gotten better over the years. But I also believe that everyone that went through that, even if they had some challenging experiences, it is an opportunity that I think veterans who get their education and go on to transition to their careers, everyone talking about higher level positions, we still have a huge population, myself included, that are baby boomer generations that are going to retire, and they're going to be replaced by people who are leaders, who are inclusive, who have gotten their education, who have learned how to collaborate and work with all community partners to solve complex issues. I think the future is going to be bright in the sense that I think veterans are going to have a place at the table to sort of lead by example, take care of people, and do their best. And I'm not saying everything has always been perfect. I think there's a great opportunity on the horizon. I'm proud of everyone's story and what all these companies are trying to do. So with that, I'd like to now start with talking about the different kinds of employers you're working for in your transition, and then how do you navigate workplace politics. And I guess we'll start with you, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross. So I'll talk a bit about both the employers that I worked for, since I'm recently at CCSD for just the past few months. But as I transitioned, I went to MGM Resorts, which for those of you in Las Vegas, it's the largest employer, one of the largest employers here in town. It was a interesting environment. I'll say interesting. I'll throw that out there. Where as veterans, I would say, at least the veterans that I've run into, we look for two things in our employment, which is a sense of purpose and to feel appreciated. All right, are the two most important things to us. And MGM Resorts does a lot of great things. There was certainly a lot of appreciation there, and a great team to work with. But my time there was awesome, and I really enjoyed it. However, I was missing a bit of that sense of purpose. Right. And that kind of led me to the school district here. I grew up here in Las Vegas. Right. I was a product of the school district. I heard a lot of challenges were going on, especially in an area that I could help with. Came over, took up the challenge, and I don't want to look back. I mean, it's just phenomenal as far as the sense of purpose that I have on a daily basis, the inclusion over there, everybody willing to, take part in whatever's going on. It's like being in the military again, almost, right? With the selflessness, which is what I would say. And it certainly resonates with me, with the people around me. So I'm certainly very fortunate and very blessed to be where I'm at. And, I would say as veterans, as you transition, make sure that until you find that sense of purpose and that appreciation, that you keep looking. Right? Don't be upset with where you're at, but never stop looking until you find that. Workplace politics. That's always interesting. There's a bit of a assimilation in any workplace that you get into. I remember my first few weeks at MGM Resorts. I sat down with one of my teammates and I had a conversation about them failing at a project. All right, I said, you failed at this task. All right, it wasn't, and I said, you do a great job. I said, you failed right here, and they started tears and things of that nature. Found myself in HR the next day being counseled about how I couldn't use the word failed in a conversation. Even though in the military we think nothing of it, right? It's just hey, you failed, let's get better. Right? You didn't meet expectations, let's get better. So I had to certainly develop my conversation to be able to assimilate with the individuals that I was around and be HR appropriate. So I didn't have as much experience in HR as you probably have. So being in that environment, you certainly had to adapt. And I would encourage everybody to be a lifelong learner and never feel like you know everything. So, my identity helps me show up in a positive way in that nature. And as long as I consider myself as somebody who could learn something from every interaction and every day, then I've had those positive experiences. And again, I try and keep it positive and try and continue on to the next day and always try and get better. But the military certainly set me up for all that, and I love the employer I'm with right now. I can keep on babbling here, but probably not accomplishing anything beyond that. Jeff, would you jump in here?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. My identity hasn't really impacted the type of employer I work for. I will tell you, being a veteran impacted me getting hired because they were looking to my first director here. She was retired Air Force, and she wanted a veteran in this position to do more outreach into the community, to draw more veterans into the program itself. So not so much, it impact, because I'm gonna be honest with you, when I graduated, I wasn't looking just to work for a company that was friendly to veterans. That wasn't an objective at all. So I was looking for a job that I thought I might like. I found out when I was on campus, I worked in the office with Roche there as a student worker. And so my time there, I spent my time there. I found out I really enjoyed being on campus. And so, and I had met my prior director before through Ross, working on some other initiatives when I was the president of the Rebel Vets. And then she found out I was looking for a job and had an interview. And luckily I was hired because she was having a hard time trying to find somebody to fill the position that was a veteran. So it worked out. So my identity, and even I kind of struggle with that. I don't look at myself. My identity is just I'm me. I'm not just a veteran. I'm also a husband, a son, a brother, a friend. I'm still a student. So, and then being a veteran is just part of who I am. I don't identify it with it strictly. So it definitely helped me getting a job. As far as navigating the workplace politics, I'm totally going to agree with Stephen on that. As far as the language, right? So I had to adjust, like Stephen said about, hey, you guys, and that's a great point. Hey, you failed at this task. We need to do better. Happens all the time in the military. And like Stephen says, he's like, you don't even think twice about it. Yeah, I failed. I'll fix myself, Sergeant. So, so as far as that, yeah, that's been my biggest challenge, is just navigating how I speak, you know. So I have to be cognizant, like in the military, you know, just being shy of saying something you shouldn't say. It's you know, it's pretty vocal in there. So, and then as far as being a veteran, you know, it's just the stuff that carries with me that I learned when I was in the military. You know, being on time, being in the right uniform, being in the right place, being at the right time, right? It's the same thing that when you're in your civilian jobs or you're rolling over into the civilian sector, it's like, do the right thing, be at the right place, be at the right time, and be in the right uniform. And as long as you're doing those things, you know, you're showing up as you. They're like, oh yeah, he's a vet, but that's how Jeff is showing up, and that's how Ross, and that's how Steven and Celia and Linda are showing up as part of those what's the word I'm looking for? Part of those things that make you who you are, you know, veteran being one of them. So I hope I was able to answer that properly for you guys. So I'll pass this along to Miss Rocha.
Thank you, Jeff. So on my end, I would say that my identity as a veteran did have a huge impact with my first employer when I first got out of the military, because of the fact that the aviation field in flight operations is it's primarily male dominant. So that right there, you have, as a female, you have such a hard time trying to get in and try to get to those higher levels, supervisor or management positions because of that. It shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately, sometimes that does happen. And when I initially interviewed with the company, the HR person was like, oh, I don't know, she's a female. We're actually looking for a male. And right then I was like, wait a minute. What does that have to do with anything? I can do the job just as good as a male can, you know? So the owner, walked in, he ended up coming in to the conference room, and he started talking to me, and he asked me what my background was. So I told him, you know, I was in the Army, and he said, he's the one that I was thankful that he stood up and said, hey, why are you putting a limitation, you know? So the HR representative at the time had mentioned that, you know, it's a male dominant office. We've never had a female, so we don't want any issues. So to me, I was, you know, my first job was the military. I didn't even think of any sexual harassment or anything because I'm used to being in the field with men and cursing all the time. So I was like, okay, I don't understand, you know? So when she was like, are you okay? You think there'll be issues? And I was like, no, we're just going to get the job done, you know? So to me, I think if I wouldn't have had that military background, that would have been possibly a reason that I would have not gotten the position. So that did have an impact with my first job. When that company ended up going under, when I was looking for a new job, I had already clicked in after being there for some time. It clicked like, wait a minute, that was not right, you know? I never experienced that prior to that. So when I looked into possibly getting another job and I found AAA, I really did my research within the company to find out what are their values, what are their core values? Is it something that I can associate with? Am I going to feel appreciated? Or if it's something that's going to make me feel uncomfortable? So that's what I looked for with AAA. When I learned, you know, their core values and stuff, I figured, okay, this is a company that I would be proud to work for. So when it comes to the workplace politics, I agree with Steve and Jeff in regards to the language. You have to kind of watch how you speak to people, because you get so used to, when they say failure, like, okay, just like Jeff said, I'm gonna fix myself, Sergeant, no big deal, and move on. Now you really have to think about all these other factors. Am I being offensive? What's the proper language to use? So that was something that was a little bit difficult at the beginning for me. Even after working with the prior company, because of the fact that it was male dominant, it was kind of a no filter place. So that was something that I struggled for a little bit, but with time you kind of learn how to navigate those type of issues. Celia, go ahead.
Perfect. So I would have to agree with all of the other panelists in regards to, how they've looked for employers and what they've looked for. I would say that, for my personal identity, because I come from such a long line of veterans and service members, I personally wanted to be with an organization that showed that appreciation for the veterans, that wanted to build, a relationship with the bases, with the SVA chapters, that wanted to be involved in community events, things along those lines. So that's really why I ended up taking the position that I'm in now. I will have to agree with everyone as far as finding your purpose and having appreciation on both ends, the company appreciating you and your service and what you can bring to the table from a skill set standpoint, but also you showing appreciation back to that organization as well. It's definitely a two-way street. From a politics navigation standpoint, I would have to say, definitely knowing your audience. There are a lot of things that can be said and done in the military that you cannot necessarily say or do in the civilian world. And I have a perfect example. I hired a Marine. He was a lieutenant colonel, served for about 25 years. And this is his first civilian role out of the Marines. So he had a really hard time at first navigating what those waters were like. He was very used to someone seeing his uniform, knowing where he stood in the ranks and showing him that respect. Once you get into the civilian world, that uniform comes off and you look like everyone else. You don't know who the CEO is. You don't know who, the janitor is necessarily. And, so he was having a really hard time kind of navigating those waters. And eventually I told him, I said, you might have to tone it down just a little bit, as far as the brashness and things like that, but you can still get your thoughts across. You can still get your ideas across. You just need to know your audience. You need to know who it is that you're talking to. So one of the things that I coached him on was the organization. Unfortunately, and this is one of the things that I'm working on internally, unfortunately, no one sat down with him and showed him the organization chart. No one sat down with him and showed him the rank structure, if you will, or showed him where individuals fall within the organization. So once he had that tool and once he understood it, his entire demeanor changed. So really one of the things that I encourage individuals to do is just be open and have those conversations with their management team. And if they don't feel comfortable having that conversation, go to a trusted HR person, go to your recruiter, or go if there's an internal military representative, if there's an employee resource group or something along those lines, reach out for those sources and those tools to help navigate, how you can overcome those challenges within the organization.
Thank you, Celia. I would like to add a little bit too that I got out of the Army in 2005 and I've been at UNLV and I've had a couple different jobs. I worked Homeland Security. I worked on grants in a role similar to what Jeff's doing now, kind of deal. I was on soft money for a while. And then I was asked to stand up a vet center. And just recently I've been, last 18 months, I've been leading two departments, the International Student Office and the Veteran Office. And when I took on the additional office because they needed assistance and we turned things around, it was interesting how people who've known me for 15 years said, Ross, I didn't know you could lead an office that wasn't veterans. It was pretty interesting. But I also had a mentor of mine who had been out and worked in academia, and this is not a hit on academia, but he told me, he's from Texas A&M as a retired colonel, He said, you know, your chain of command in academia or in the business world, your boss is not like the colonel. And I said, what do you mean? He said, in the military, you go through a series of structured trainings from private, if you're enlisted, from private to sergeant to platoon sergeant to first sergeant to sergeant. I'm an Army guy, so I'm talking Army lingo. Same thing in the officer rank. You go from lieutenant to captain to major to a field grade to a staff guy to a command and general staff. And along that route, if you are a senior sergeant major or high ranking like Stephen was as a career person, Stephen, I'm sure you had about 5 or 6 leadership academy kind of things that you went through in your career. You didn't just wake up to be a sergeant major or a colonel. And his point was, like in academia, there are very talented folks that end up being in a leadership role like a dean, but it might be their first leadership role. So, and what it means by that is you need to take all of your experience and training and different things as a veteran, bring all that to bear in a positive way, collaborate, be kind to everyone, work with everyone, build what you're going to build. And again, you don't know who has real power in organizations. It's not like anyone's walking around with any kind of rank. So you just, it's not that you have to be on guard. You just have to be a respectful kind of person that makes stuff happen and work with people. And that's been great advice for me. We do a lot of coaching of vets in different transitions. People had different careers. Some people had, you know, a couple of years of service. Someone had a whole career, but every transition is different. So I think this is a great conversation. So now we want to go to the next one, and I think I'll mix it up a little bit. We're going to talk about challenges and support. So how about we'll go the other way. Celia, how about we'll start with you this time?
Perfect. So some of the challenges that I've experienced in my career, more specifically as it relates to the military and veterans, is unfortunately some people feel like veterans, because of the ERGs or because of, you know, the various types of retention strategies or things like that, might feel like they're getting priority, or they're getting favoritism because another individual doesn't necessarily have the veteran background. They're recruited, they're hired, and then that's kind of it. So sometimes there have been challenges in the past where it's a very kind of fine line, delicate line that we in HR walk, if you will, to make sure that our non-veteran employees, as well as our military and veteran employees, feel that same amount of support. You know, we don't want to favor one side or the other. Same with our other ERGs when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We really make sure that we do a really good job of making sure that everyone has all the tools available to them to be successful, and it's ultimately up to them on how they use them. So one of the things that we do, I've mentioned it a couple of times, that the current employer that I work for now does in supporting veterans in their identity, is we have our internal employee resource group. It's called Proud to Serve. We do everything from, they help me with recruitment efforts. So if I can't get to a school or if I can't get to a base because I am at a national level, I'll call out for that local chapter of our internal ERG to assist me with that. We do various appreciation events, you know, Military Appreciation Month. We recognize Memorial Day. We do a big thing for Veterans Day. You know, we send out, you know, welcome letters to new veterans from our CEO, you know, welcoming them to the organization. We have a lot of different things in regards to a mentorship. So as individuals come into the organization that identify, or that self-identify, we partner them with another veteran that has been with the organization for at least 5 years. We try to partner them where they come from the same branch or even roughly the same MOS. We also try to structure it where if there's someone coming in post 9/11, an individual will also be paired with them that's post 9/11, so that, every wartime is a little bit different and the challenges are a little bit different. So we do what we can to make sure that, our veteran and military individuals are supported as best as possible, and so that they're set up for success, long term. Oh, sorry, Stephen, if you want to go ahead.
Is it me, or are we totally reversing it here, Ross?
Yeah, let's go with Linda. Linda, can you go next?
Sure. I think kind of hard for the challenge. I think for a challenge that I sometimes face is whenever we are doing some sort of training and I have a group of people that I'm going to train. For some reason, when they know that I'm a prior military, I'm a veteran, they have this idea that when they go into my classroom to do some training, it's going to be a very strict training where I'm just going to talk to you and not have an open conversation going back and forth of how it go, how the new system's going to work or what the processes are. So once they actually get into the classroom with me and they realize that it's not me talking to them and it's an open discussion and everybody can present their ideas, it's like an aha moment for them. So I think that's one of the challenges that I face constantly at work. Because they say that when they see me walking around in the office, they're like, no, we know you're like a sergeant, or, they're like, because you have this very, you sometimes have a stern look, or we get kind of nervous. And I'm like, no. So I think that would be like a challenge. And then something that my current employer does relating that supports our identity is I really appreciate our military appreciation group, because it allows not only veterans, but anybody in our company to participate within our group so that we can do community service and reach out to veterans to help. So I really enjoy that. Jeff?
Thank you, Linda. I totally am going to agree with your statement on, like, when you're teaching or you're getting up to speak in front of people, because I get that all the time. They look at me and they think, I'm mad, or, like, oh, he's a vet. And I'm like, no, I'm not mad. Just, I was just born with this face. It's all good, So, yeah, with that being said, I'm going to be honest, I haven't really faced many challenges or as identifying as a veteran, other than the fact of maybe just, I think Linda touching on some of these preconceived notions that people can have just because of, you identify as a vet, that you're a hard, that, like you said, you're strict and you hold yourself, or you have these expectations of how other people should act, or whatever the case may be. I think that's maybe been my biggest challenge. Is I still get that every once in a while, but I'm used to it and it's all good. So I totally understand that. As far as my current employer, UNLV loves the vets, man. I mean, I have no complaints with how UNLV treats anybody on campus. It doesn't matter how you're identifying. I think they do a fantastic job. I'm the president of the UNLV, the Alumni Veterans Club, too. We have a Veterans Club under the alumni, so I'm currently the president of that, and we're still building that program. And UNLV's been a huge supporter of that. Like, it's, all the stuff I've been a part of as a student at UNLV has been because of their support. And then now that I'm working for them, it's still there. So I can't say anything about UNLV and any challenges that may present itself, because there's always something in place. And Ross has done a great job of building resources for students on campus. And those resources are also for any veterans that are on campus as well. You just don't have to be a student. So, and Ross has done a great job in facilitating the conversation and getting it where it is with the university. So, yeah, that's where I'm at on this one. So I'm good to go. I really don't have any other challenges. And I will pass it on to Mr. Flack.
So when I first transitioned, when I showed up at MGM, they kind of had a preconceived notion of what somebody in the military would be like. People were not comfortable in communicating with me at first, and I could tell that they had their stereotypes as I walked into the team. But I think that comes from any industry. If you transition industries, and I look at the military as an industry, all right, and that's not to minimize what we did or what we accomplished or anything like that. It's just a different lifestyle. Kind of, as Jeff said, he's looking to get out of maybe into the private sector, right, from the public sector. You're switching industries. You would have a stereotype that would associate with you from somebody leaving the public sector. But really, how I overcame that is just by being myself. I'm weird in the fact that every day that I walked into 3 years at MGM Resorts, I high-fived the concierge and the security guard as I walked into the building, and I did that consistently every single day. Right? Eventually, I broke down those barriers. They saw that I was somebody who was approachable. High fives are not socially acceptable nowadays. I know that. But when it was socially acceptable, I was doing it. The employee network groups, I got the ERG, we call them the ENG there. I got involved in that. I eventually got involved in being part of the leadership committee there. After about a year there, jumped in because I thought that I had a lot to offer in that. They also allowed me to pursue some community service and really focusing on the selfless nature of what we can do as veterans and what we can do for people who can influence in the community. I sat on the advisory board for US Vets here in town, which is a nonprofit that is geared on ending veteran homelessness, and they supported me in doing that. So it was great, as far as the support that I got from the veteran aspect of my background and the things that were important to me as a veteran. They had veterans only hiring event once a year, where it was only veterans, spouses, and other family members, veteran connected individuals. So for MGM Resorts, they really put forth an effort to care about veterans, and they supported us in all of our wonky ideas that we came up with, right, to recognize veterans and support them. Currently at the school district, they're allowing me to build out and take the lead on helping transition of veterans going into education. All right, become teachers or become individuals that work with the school district, professionals that work with the school district, and trying to figure out what those pathways are and the resources, and identify how we engage and how we interact with veterans. All the employers that I've worked for so far, both employers certainly value the things that veterans bring to the table with those intangible things, as Jeff said earlier, the leadership, the discipline, the self-confidence, the self-direction, self-reliance. All of that is something that I was fortunate that the employers recognized. So, Ross.
Thank you, Steve. And I made a note, Steve, that I need to connect with you in the future. I'm not sure if you've ever met Georgianne Rice. Do you know Georgianne Rice?
Oh, Georgianne takes up quite a bit of my time nowadays. Yes,
sure
yes.
And she's an interesting gal, but I would tell you on the legislative side, there is going to be a new troops to education bill that's going to be more robust and more uniform that could very help you in what you're trying to do. I'll keep you posted without consuming too much of your time on that subject, okay? But we got
absolutely.
And then I would just add to that piece too that we have like 1,800 vets that all have different experiences coming to UNLV, and everyone's transition is different. And I've been running the Vet Center for 8 years, and with what things that have been happening recently, I've met with my team. We have been recognized for what we do, but I feel like we could do so much more. And what I mean by that is we have helped individuals that have been incarcerated before. It doesn't matter what race they were veterans, and we help them get back on their feet, get into school, access GI Bill, and put themselves on a different path. And we want to do more of that. When you think of the gay community, we have been inclusive, but I think we could be even more so. We've had different people do briefings with us, with our peer-to-peer team. We have helped other veterans with other challenges where things were not as inclusive when they were in their service, to where we tried to help them with that and then improve things too. But I guess what I would close on that piece is everyone that gets into their positions, not any kind of special treatment like Celia was talking about, but having someone who can coach and mentor and say, yeah, I've been in another organization now for 3 years at MGM or CCSD or even at UNLV. Let me tell you how I can help you sort of transition. I remember a senior chief in the Navy just very upset because, damn it, I want to help run a ship. And I had to say, there's not a lot of ships in Las Vegas. I hate to tell you that. But what could we do to help you with your experience, do what you're doing next? So I really appreciate all of you guys. So now we're going to go with advice, and I'm just going to randomly pick some people now, and then you can pick your person. So let's start with Linda. I'll start with you on this one, okay?
Hi. I would say just stay true to yourself and your values, and whatever company you decide to work for, just make sure their values align with your values, and that way you have a good combination there. And you're happy where you're at, because the moment that it doesn't align, that's when you start to kind of question yourself. So that is the piece of advice that I would give. Steve?
It's interesting. Both you and Ross said something that really resonates with me. The values, I said that earlier. The two things that we need, which is the feeling of appreciativeness and that sense of purpose. Right, those are really important. But something that Ross also said, because I dealt with a lot of veteran hiring and I try and mentor veterans as they transition into the workplace, is you have to be realistic in your expectations as you transition. Again, I go back to myself overseeing recruiting for the military, for the Marine Corps, 4,000 people working with the joint staff, joint services, briefing at the Pentagon, and sometimes with our Congress and things like that. But I knew absolutely nothing about hospitality. Right? I knew zero about hospitality as I transitioned into that. So I understood I had to take a step back. As I tell veterans as they transition, that colonel that's transitioning from the whatever branch of military, and they want to come in and be a VP of a hotel, then my response to them, my counterpart to them is, I have a VP of a hotel who's really, really good at running that hotel. I'd like to have him go run your artillery section. Right? I would love for him to go be the captain of your boat. Right? I would love for him to go be, the squadron commander. Right? Because he's great at leadership. He's proven himself. He has a couple decades of experience under his belt in leadership. And I think he would do great in firing that artillery downrange. And then a lot of times the veterans will take a step back and they'll realize what they're asking and what their expectations are, because you have to gain some credibility in the field that you're looking at. Your leadership, your experience, right? All of those things are going to transcend whatever it is that you're going to get into, but you have to get some organizational knowledge and some functional knowledge of where you're transitioning to. So that's the best piece of advice I could give you, hopefully. Jeff.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Stephen and Linda were saying. When Ross had mentioned earlier about having the job fairs on campus and stuff, I used to help get those set up and everything. And we'd have some veterans come in because it was open to all veterans in the Valley, not just students. And so, you'd always hear something like, well, I did this and this, I was this rank and this rank. I want something commensurate of that in the same, in the civilian sector. And I totally agree with Steve on that. That's a great analogy. He's like, that's cool. But this guy's a great leader, so we'll switch and he go run the section and you come back. So it allows them to take a step back and actually think about that. And that relates to me because I came in as, at UNLV, I came in on for lack of a better term, on the bottom rung, right? I just came in as an academic counselor, so I was making a particular base salary. But I understood that and I accepted it because I realized I'm not going to I don't expect to go right into a new organization without any prior experience. But just because I had this military experience, expecting me to become a assistant director or something. Number one, I don't have the education yet because at UNLV, if you want to be any type of leader, you got to have a master's at a minimum. So that's one thing I have to recognize. And I also have to recognize that I'm coming into a brand new organization. I'm starting at the bottom. I need to, be realistic on my expectations going into this new position. Now, if you have the experience, and that's a whole different other thing, but I've come across a few vets that have an expectation of, because of their education background and maybe what they did in the military, they think that's enough to relate to the same experience in the civilian sector, when they may have never worked for that organization or have never worked in that particular position. So I think that's another thing that, veterans need to look at when they're making that transition into their professional careers. Like, have some, like Stephen and Linda were saying, have some realistic expectations for yourself and for that new position going in, and then use it to build on that. And that's what I'm doing here at UNLV. I'm using this as a stepping stone, regardless if I'm staying here at UNLV and getting a different position on campus as an executive director or program manager, or if I come across another position in another, with another organization, be it public or private. That was my whole intent of this, is like, I'm coming in kind of as a private at UNLV when I came in as a private in the Army. So I got to build up my rank structure, for lack of a better term, to get into those type of positions that I want. So I think that would be my biggest advice, is have high expectations for yourself, but also you need to be pragmatic and have realistic expectation as well. And then I should pass it on to Ms. Strasser.
Thanks, Jeff. So I would definitely have to agree with all of the other panelists. They have some great advice from their experiences. Another thing that I'd like to add to that is networking. As you're searching and kind of navigating the career waters, whether you're transitioning now, you've already transitioned, you'll be transitioning in the future, whatever that looks like for you, network. LinkedIn, it will be one of the best tools and resources you can possibly use. And as a veteran, you get LinkedIn Premium for 1 year free. And that's usually about a $1,500 cost. So just network and leverage your network and your connections. One of the most important things that I'd have to say is doing your research on top of the networking. So, like as I'd mentioned, my brothers are both veterans. One is a Navy veteran, one is an Army veteran. And my older brother, who is a Navy veteran, he had a very rough transition, if you will. He had 2 or 3 different jobs within the first 18 or so months of his transition, because he didn't do his research on the organization. His core values didn't necessarily align to the company's values and what their missions were and things like that. So really just do your research and make sure that an organization that you select to work with really follows what they say their core values are. Ross?
I'd like to highlight Jeff for a minute. So Jeff was our Rebel Vet president as a brand new student. He worked at our office, but in that networking role, he was allowed to travel with Governor Sandoval's team and Caleb Cage to all the schools across NC, meet all the other student veteran SVA leadership from the state. And when he talked about his hiring at CAEO, it was true. They were looking for a person in that position. I think they were even getting ready to close that position after a failed search. But it was the network of people that knew Jeff on campus that when his name came up, everyone was ecstatic. HR then reopened it. He had to compete for the position. So my point is, Jeff, I don't think really knew he was networking when he was networking. He was sort of serving a mission and trying to take care of fellow vets and be inclusive and accommodating and collaborative with other schools, which again, there's a lot of rivalries among schools, but there's not within SVA. And I was just very proud of all of that. We've had so many of those stories at UNLV. And even myself, I got out and I was in charge of Homeland Security PowerPoints for FBI, Metro Police, and everything else when I got out to work for the Institute when I retired from the Army. And I turned down Lieutenant Colonel to take that position. I don't regret it, but I literally went from a commander of Army ROTC on the colonel's list to you're in charge of PowerPoints, Ross, for the sheriff. It was an interesting kind of deal, So I'm just proud of everybody. So I guess that the next slide, I guess, Cassie, is what's the next slide? What do we have? Is that it, or do we open it up to people? So I know we have some folks that are on the that are basically taking the course and listening to the panel. Do we have any questions from anyone?
Yep, now is a good time to ask any questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up in the next few minutes just to be conscious of time. It is 3:30, but if any of our participants today have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. While they do that, panelists, if you'd like to drop your contact information in the chat now, you're welcome to, whether it's your LinkedIn or your email or however you would like any of our participants to contact you. Just to remind you, this will of course be posted on the Career Services YouTube channel, which is listed on the screen right now. So if you want to refer back to it, if you want to share it on any of your social medias, you're welcome to do that. And we do really appreciate your time. We'll stay here for a few more minutes in case we get any questions, but I'll go ahead and stop the recording in just a moment.